none of your faces, none of your faces will be seen, but just want to you hear that little notification and just wanted to give you the heads up. Hi everyone, and thank you all for joining us for Resource Central's Waterwise Yard seminar, Compost and Soil Health: A Deeper Dive with Rutger Myers of EcoCycle. My name is Allie Colbert, and I'm the Senior Program Coordinator for the Garden in a Box program. For those of you new to Resource Central, we are a Colorado-based nonprofit that has been around since 1976. We offer conservation programs in three main areas. That includes waste diversion, energy conservation, and of course, water conservation. We partner with over 60 water providers statewide to provide four water conservation programs to residents. First, of course, is this webinar that you're attending tonight, which is part of our Waterwise Yard seminar series, which are free and available to anyone that can join. We've got about 30 events, and there's still a few more as we round out the end of the season. There'll be some until August. Next up, the Garden in a Box program offers a selection of professionally designed low water garden kits made for Colorado yards, and those are currently on sale for pickup in August and September. So be sure to check out our website for those if you're interested in purchasing a garden. Our lawn replacement program leaves you with a blank slate to create a more water-saving landscape. That's also still taking applications for lawn removal this year. And finally, our Slow the Flow sprinkler evaluations help Coloradans use water wisely with free on-site sprinkler evaluations. Those are also kind of up and running right now. So again, if you're curious about any of those programs or want to learn more about water conservation options that are available to you, or just learn more about Resource Central in general, you can go to our website at resourcecentral.org. The city of Denver is sponsoring tonight's webinar, and they also participate in all four of those water conservation programs. So huge thanks to the city of Denver for their support. Alrighty, so before we begin, just wanted to touch on some quick logistics as well. As you heard, the seminar is being recorded tonight, and we will share that recording with you all afterwards. Secondly, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, you can go ahead and use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit those. We'll pause once in the middle and then once at the end of the presentation to address those questions, but don't hesitate to ask them as you have them in that Q&A section. I'll be on kind of moderating, and when we pause for those question breaks, we'll be addressing the questions that are relevant to the majority of listeners here, just knowing we've got a lot of folks on. Lastly, just a heads up that at the end of tonight's webinar, when you exit, a survey link will pop up. If you have a moment to fill that out then, that would be fantastic. If not, you can again keep an eye out for the email in the next few days from us with some follow-up resources, the link to this recording, and then also another link to that survey. All of your feedback is really appreciated. It helps us keep these seminars as engaging and relevant as possible. Alrighty, so that's enough from me. At this point, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Rutger and introduce himself and get us started.
Hello, my name is Rutger Myers. I am the Director of Compost and Carbon Farming at EcoCycle, and today we're going to talk about compost and soil health. We're going to get a little deeper, a little more technical than just your beginner's soil health talk. A little bit about me. I started out in this industry as a farmer. I was a volunteer first, and I just totally fell in love with the culture of farming. I got into soil science because I wanted to make myself useful on the farm, and no one else was doing it. So that's it in a nutshell. And composting is really, it's a tough business, but there's an incredible amount of opportunity. And what it attracts me to soil science is the opportunity. So through luck, I ended up being in an emerging field of science, and I'm studying the biological side of soil, which is the future, and there's so much more to learn about soil ecology. These are the things that I get to do as a soil enthusiast, soil health technician formerly, and now I'm the director of compost. In my former job, I used to drive a tractor in the morning. I used to teach kids during lunch, and then I'd look under the microscope in the afternoon, and it's just a wonderful variety of work. And the same is true for all growers. You really need to be a jack of all trades to be a successful grower. And let's add soil science to the farmer's tool belt. That's my goal for tonight, for or the gardener or whoever is growing in that soil. So now I work for EcoCycle. EcoCycle is one of the nation's oldest recycling nonprofits. Uh, EcoCycle started hauling recyclables out of school buses in the 70s. So it's a great personality match. We're scrappy and we focus on recycling and conserving natural resources. But coming into a recycling business as a composter, I've learned that there are some differences. Um, EcoCycle does a wonderful job recycling, and the purpose of recycling is taking natural resources. Often you get them in a collection bin, and then you're separating. The name of the game with recycling is clean streams of metal or wood or plastic, and it's all about separating to get that natural resource back. When we're making compost and then later building soil, it's still about conserving natural resources. But as a composter, I'm taking organics, so food scraps, yard waste, and I'm building a recipe based off the nutrients, based off the biology that eats that nutrient. So composting and soil health is a creative endeavor. Collecting the organics is just the start of it. And when we talk about the impact to our planet, the emissions from the landfill are enormously important. So diverting that into compost is hugely important. But I would argue that more important than that is building soil. If we were to fix all of our soil today, we would reverse climate change in a couple years. And it's an extremely powerful tool that a lot of people don't understand in a climate context. So what has attracted me to soil science and composting is that it's something proactive that I can do in our fight uh, for climate change, I mean, against climate change. And I can drive big machines and I can do more and more and more of it. And the more I do, the better it is for our planet. And it's mutually beneficial. I mean, the healthy soil grows healthy plants. And that's what I want to talk about today. So at EcoCycle, I'm doing the same work, except with 8 farms. We are diverting food scraps, we're diverting organics from municipal sources, and we are putting in extra time to make high quality compost. And the goal of this project is to build soil. The goal of this project is to get farmers more comfortable using compost again, and let's bring this soil back to life. And let's understand the true value of compost. So I want to start this soil talk with Dr. Elaine Ingham. This is where I get most of my information, and she's a true inspiration to me. And she teaches what's called the Soil Food Web School. And the point of this school, if you take one thing home today, understand that soil by definition is alive. Without life, soil's just dirt. Those are two different words that mean very different things. And I want you to understand soil by definition is alive. And the plants that soil grows, it all depends on the types of life in that soil. Just to give perspective, there are more microbes in and on my body, your body, than there are human cells. So maybe we're as much microbe as we are human. It's a part of how we've evolved, and it's a part of how we digest. And there are a lot of the same microbes in soil, in healthy soil, that are in our bodies. So if we consume healthy vegetables that come from healthy soil, they make us stronger, they build immunities to diseases. And then the opposite could be true for unhealthy soil. There's a lot of when things go wrong, and I don't want you to be afraid of soil, but that there can be disease-causing organisms. So managing soil is a human health concern. And in a spoonful of healthy soil, there are more microbes than there are humans on Earth. So as we enter this soil talk, I want you to understand that the scale of this is unfathomable. And we're doing our best to understand the key components, the major trends, and how we can guide this biology to make real changes that we can see and we can measure. So these are some of the characters that I want to talk about today. We have organic matter, but then we have bacteria and fungi. And this is the ecosystem of soil. If I were to classify myself in the science context, it would be a soil ecologist. And the purpose of these microbes is to keep nutrients cycling. So it cycles through the plant, back into the atmosphere, back into the soil, and it's a natural cycle of nutrients. I just said cycle, but it's more complicated than that. This is a soil food web. These creatures interact in the context of a web. So there's the bacteria that can be eaten by pretty much everything, but then there are nematodes that eat other nematodes. There are nematodes they're fungi that eat nematodes. So all these characters interact with each other, some of them in a way that doesn't quite fit that cycle. So I think that has part of the reason why is part of the reason why this concept is so hard to understand because it's not straightforward. I mean, we're seeing creatures do things that we didn't necessarily think they did, and it's a new science, so it's really exciting. Today, we're going to focus on some hot terms like regenerative agriculture and permaculture. In my opinion, these words tend to have wandering definitions, but the basic principle is to build soil that's good for our planet. And when we dissect what is regenerative agriculture and what is permaculture, maybe there might be some differences in the list, but the basic principle is pay more attention to your soil. And the reason this is becoming a movement with farmers is that farmers are starting to see that regenerative practices are reducing labor costs, reducing water needs, and reducing fertilizers, and hopefully eventually eliminating fertilizers. I mean, these are natural growing systems. I mean, that's how you can summarize it in a nutshell. But if I were to put a definition on regenerative agriculture, this is what it looks like. This is the most complete list that I see passed around, and I want you to notice every single principle is about soil. Animal integration is also about soil. Everything else mentions soil or it's compost. So this is about soil stewardship, and the broad approach is it's hands off with targeted actions. You're sort of guiding the biology to do what it would naturally do. You're removing the barriers that biology that we've put as humans in our soil, and you're allowing biology to do the work that it naturally wants to do. And these practices, they're not all or nothing. You know, I don't want you to be discouraged if you don't have goats in your yard. We don't all have animals to integrate into our systems, and that's fine. Take what you can do and integrate that into your growing system. So we're going to start with my favorite thing in the world, compost. My goal with making compost in the context of soil health and growing is to eliminate the need for fertilizers. This compost is a soil amendment that focuses on biology. And if I were to define compost in a sense, it would be we're growing a culture of bacteria and fungi that will thrive in our soil. So what I want you to think about is what compost am I buying? How am I treating my compost? Is it sitting there for very long? Is it staying moist? Is it staying alive? And maybe it's worth putting a little bit more time and energy or resources into buying a higher quality compost. The best thing that you can do is make your own compost. You can make compost at your house, at your farm, that is a higher quality than anything that you can buy because it has the microbes that already want to live on your property. So the more sources you take and compost on site, the more native microbes and the faster you're going to see differences. So what is compost? Well, we know it's not a fertilizer. We say it's a soil amendment, and that's great. But I want to move the focus away from nutrients, and microbes are made of nutrients. So it's not that we're not talking about nutrients, we're just talking about them in a different form. And how I would classify compost is a microbial inoculant. And that's really nerdy to hear, but if you break it down, we're growing microbes and we're inoculating. So it's like if I were to drink kombucha, our soil is drinking kombucha. So we're taking the healthy bacteria that wants to live in my gut or live in the soil, and we're introducing that, and we're hoping for some better digestive changes in our soil. We're hoping that organic matter will break down sooner and those nutrients will get to the plant sooner. What kinds of microbes are we talking about? We're talking about aerobic microbes. There's a whole set of microbes that do not like oxygen. They're called anaerobes, and these are the microbes that we want to avoid when we're growing. These are the microbes that will make us sick, make our plant sick. So before they make us sick, they'll make our plant sick, and we'll see it happen. So when you start to see diseases in your plants, the best natural solution would be composting, adding compost, because you're adding the natural microbes that keep your plant healthy. They make a film over your plant that literally protects your plant from external diseases. So we're going to talk about compost very briefly and then get into soil. Uh, why do we turn compost? It's to add oxygen. So I'm going to talk about it a lot in that context. Oxygen and water are the most important things with compost and soil because that's what kickstarts the biology. When we turn compost, we're sort of evening the playing field, right? So if we have a lot of bacteria over here and a lot of fungi over here, and we mix it together, and then it's an even playing field. Unfortunately, we don't have that luxury with soil. So you got to spend the time in compost and get it right and try to get a consistent product that has the same biology throughout. And that's where turning really comes in handy. That's where watering makes a lot of sense. And you want to pay attention to the heat of your pile. So the heat of compost is produced by bacteria. And bacteria, they're really small. They reproduce every 20 minutes. And I want you to imagine, imagine if 100 of us were in a room and we're running around. What would happen? We'd get sweaty, it'd get hot, it would get a little stuffy. And that's exactly what you're trying to avoid in your compost pile. You're trying to fluff that pile up before we run out of oxygen because so much bacteria will come in, they'll see a lot of food for them, and they'll come in and they'll dominate that center of the pile. Just like us, they breathe in oxygen and they'll breathe up all the oxygen. So what ends up happening is a low oxygen or a zero or an anaerobic oxygen condition, which leads to those bad smells. Anaerobic bacteria tend to put out smells, and it can lead to some more serious problems in larger piles. I don't want to scare you off from composting, but what happens in a large pile, not in your backyard, but in a large pile, if you put a lot of sugar in that pile and you don't turn it, imagine what would happen. So if I were to put grapes in a Ziploc bag and seal it, I would produce wine, right? So that's how a compost pile could catch on fire if it's not managed properly. There's no oxygen, and the microbes that are thriving are the ones that produce alcohol. So it's fuel for a fire. Um, Again, this is not something you have to worry about at home, but it's important to understand the concept. So bacteria, we just said, can break things down very quickly. They're the initial stage of decomposition. But there's also another very important character in soil and in compost, and that's fungi. And fungi tends to take over the pile after it cools, and they like to eat woody material. Fungi, they grow out in a web and they reproduce every 3 hours or so. And the benefit of fungi is really in uh, will realize itself in soil. Many fungi build relationships with plants, and then the pairing of the bacteria and the fungi are what build soil structure, and we'll get more into that. But it's very important that you have both, and the reasoning and the action from this that I want you to take is let your pile cool down and let it sit. Let that woody material break down. Here in Colorado, it can take a while, but keep it wet, make sure it's cool, and let it sit. And the longer that pile sits, the higher quality you'll get because you'll get more fungi. You're giving time for the fungi to reproduce. So I want you to think about this when you're building your pile. Nitrogen and carbon, these are your greens and your browns. And we're not going to get totally into it, but I want you to understand that your nitrogen, your weeds, your food scraps, anything that's wet, that's going to be a bacterial food. So that's going to heat the pile up and it's going to happen fast. And then your carbon sources, that's your fungal food. So that's going to be your woody materials, things that you would find in a forest, less recently alive, I like to say, because even a wood chip that's a fungal food, if it recently fell off of a tree and it has a lot of sap in it, a fungus is not going to take over that wood chip until the sap dries out. Sap is a natural fungicide. So I want you to think about who you're making a recipe for. What kind of bacteria and what kind of fungi, what populations are you looking for? And we'll get more into this later. And I want you to think about an easy way to visualize it is if my plant were growing in a natural ecosystem, what would be breaking down around it? So if I were making a compost for grass, I would want a compost that has a lot of things like grass, a lot of greens. If I were making a compost for trees, I would like a lot of tree-like material, like browns. So you make a carbon-heavy compost for a tree, and a nitrogen-heavy compost for a grassland. Um, right in the middle tends to be your veggie crops. And this is how the crops that we eat end up in the middle of that fungal bacterial relationship. This 1-to-1 in the middle, that's the fungal bacterial ratio. And this is the name of the game in building soil and making compost for specific plants. Our life on Earth, our Earth started with bare rock. There were no plants. This is when bacteria dominated. Bacteria is older than fungi, and there was a period on the planet where it was just bacteria eating rocks. Then fungi comes in the mix, and lichen starts happening. Lichen are a pairing of bacteria and fungi. It's kind of both working together, which I might argue would be like the basis of life as we know it. It's a pairing of bacteria and fungi. But what lichen do is they break down rocks and they turn it into more manageable material for other microbes to eat. So here you don't see a lot of plant life, but you start to see lichen. You move further down, this is when you start to see your weeds. So this is what happens when we degrade our soil. It ends up bacterial dominant, and the plants that want to grow tend to be weeds, what we think of as weeds. Uh, as more weeds break down and more carbon builds in the soil, that's when you get to the 1-to-1 ratio, which is where our vegetables tend to reside. Then further down the line, as our vegetables become more woody and even more carbon gets into our soil, that's when bacteria starts to dominate. And once we get to an old growth forest, the fungal bacterial ratio can be like 1,000 to 1. So there's not a lot of bacteria, but there's just a ton of fungi. So you don't want to be on either end of this if you're growing something that's, a grass, a shrub, or most of the plants that I'm thinking that the audience is growing. You want to kind of fit halfway between. Um, Here in Colorado, everything tends to be more bacterial. So just skew towards fungal. It is very difficult to make a fungal dominant or even a 1-to-1 compost. It takes years and years. So just I would start with the assumption that things are bacterial and work my way towards the fungal. So why isn't our entire planet just one big forest, you might ask? Because everything's trending towards a forest. Well, in this succession, we can have setbacks, and these are natural soil disturbances or natural disasters, as we call them. This is an example from 2020 when I was farming, and we lost like 80% of our crops in 20 minutes. It's absolutely devastating, but imagine what this does to the soil. There's no more live root. There's no more cover. These types of events tend to set our soil back one rung, and then they have a much longer time building into that forest soil. So as I've said, this is the fungus. This is the beneficial fungi. This is a fungus that I've took a picture of with a with a microscope camera. And what these little creatures do is they sequester carbon. They they connect plants. If you've done any reading, you might have heard of the wood wide web. And what this is strands of fungi. Mycelium is what it's called, and it connects plant roots. And what fungi do is if you have a forest and there's one tree that's really healthy and there's one tree that's stressed, is they actually can pass nutrients between trees. And these are things that are happening under us that we don't fully understand yet, but we know that it's happening. Even further, in a vegetable crop, row crop scenario, the same thing can be happening. You can have one plant that's battling pests or diseases, and another plant that's healthy, and the plant that's healthy can actually pass the hormones and have that other plant, the sickly plant, kind of bounce back through a hormone that will deter these pests and diseases. My point with this slide is we don't fully understand what fungi do. I mean, they're incredible creatures, I'll call them, and they play a very important role in our soil and what we grow. So this is the forest. This is the fungal soil. Weeds don't want to grow here, but your vegetables don't either. Wood decomposes really fast here. So if I were to make a compost for this forest, it would be a lot of wood chips. It'd be fungal dominant. And this is why peat moss is so popular with farmers. You can take a piece of that fungi out of the forest and you can put it onto your farm. But I want you to think about the repercussions of that. Do we need to be taking from this natural ecosystem? Or can we do work in our soil to grow our own fungi that would naturally want to be in an open space rather than a forest? I mean, these are different species we're talking about. And then on the other side of the spectrum, this is grassland. This is more bacterial dominant soil. This is where grass wants to grow. This is where grass decomposes really quickly. This is dominated by a grass, but they're much more likely to have a weed problem here, right? I mean, this is where weeds would be more likely to grow. Vegetables, again, somewhere in between those two. So our second principle, this is the one most farmers will talk about. It's no-till agriculture, and this is minimizing soil disturbance. So there's not a whole lot that we can do with natural disasters, but what we can do is we can manage how we treat the soil. So tilling obviously disrupts that ecosystem. So soil needs a structure, and when we disrupt that soil, we're destroying that ecosystem. So I understand the reasoning. As a farmer, I've tilled many times, and tilling has a practical effect of fluffing soil up so it's easier to plant into. If you need to harvest some vegetables, you need to dig, like potatoes. I mean, tilling is a part of farming. But what we've learned is this big machine tilling is having huge detrimental effects. And then at your home, you can take those principles and you can make the highest quality through not disturbing your soil. So these are all the creatures, right? And when we till, it's not just digging, it's rototilling. It's like putting all of this into a blender. And yeah, the things that we see aren't surviving, like worms and beetles and springtails, but then the things that we don't see are also dying out. And what happens is the bacteria, that's the fastest thing to come back. So that's how we end up with more bacterial dominant soil is all of this stuff is wiped out, and the first thing to come back is bacteria. In a natural system, it might take hundreds of years for that soil to be more fungal dominant and want to grow more woody material. But here we are in a lifetime, and what do we do to make that happen? How can we jumpstart that process? So this is how we got in a huge mess in the 1930s. I mean, this is the Dust Bowl, and the Dust Bowl came at the time when rototilling started becoming a thing. This is a different ball game than a horse-drawn plow. Rototilling is really disturbing that soil, and that's when we started to see our topsoil deplete. This is where the Dust Bowl came from, us losing our soil structure. Uh, I'll mention it later, but I need to mention it. I need to bring it up now. Is we also there was a natural livestock there. There were bison, so we got rid of the bison that played a huge role in keeping our soil stable, in feeding the soil, in aerating the soil. So how did we end up getting hooked on fertilizer, for lack of a better phrase? This is how the Green Revolution started. We had been tilling our fields. This is how we've always known to do it. And just now we're learning that maybe it's not the best way, but we've tilled our fields. And in the 70s, we started to see crops declining because we turned our soil into dirt. And then this thing comes out of fertilizer. So we start putting fertilizer on our dirt and we see a short-term increase. So yes, fertilizer will absolutely boost your plant, but what is the sustainability of that system? Is that a ball and chain? Are you always going to have to be putting fertilizer on your plant? And what are the effects of that? Fertilizer is often a soluble nutrient, which means it dissolves in water. So when we apply too much fertilizer onto our fields, especially when our field does not have the structure to hold it, that's when we experience too much nutrient in our waterways, and that's where we see a soluble nutrient pollution. So this is where it plays a role for our planet. I'm originally from Florida, and I need to mention this is where a red tide comes from. So just like in the center of a compost pile, uh, you have a bunch of nutrients flooding the market, and then you have the bacterial population taking over and breathing up all the oxygen. So this is what happens uh, in a compost pile, in your soil, and even in water. It's about managing the nutrients to keep the biology balanced. This is healthy soil. This is a good soil structure. And I mean, just looking at the picture, it's like half root, right? I mean, it's alive, but it also has these wonderful little clumps that we call aggregates. These are structures that withhold natural and man-made disruptions. So how do we start building this structure? We actually don't. We leave it to the microbes. So when I said bacteria is the first one to come back, um, an important factor of managing that bacteria are the predators. This is a nematode. It's basically a microscopic worm, and this particular nematode wants to eat bacteria. And the bacteria is a very successful organism, right? I mean, it's the oldest and it's still going, and there's so many different types. So bacteria is not going to die out. It has a way of surviving. And what it does out of self-preservation is it emits kind of like a sticky glue substance. This is the start of building soil structure. So these sticky glue substances are so small we can't see them, but when we start to make those aggregates, those little chunks that look like Dippin' Dots, this is when the fungi come in and sort of lasso these little bacterial glue houses together. And this happens over and over and over again. And that's how you get pore space. This is called glomalin. It's soil glue, and that's what keeps our soil together. But it's also able to absorb, retain water, and let more oxygen flow throughout. So I think a really good measure of healthy soil, how much water can it retain? How quickly can it absorb that water? And the same is true for nutrients. The nutrients will follow. I'm going to take a really quick sidestep. This is probably the only time we're going to talk about things other than biology. This is where geology and soil science kind of merge. Um, our soil is not all created equal. Sand, silt, and clay soil act very differently. So sandy soil, in particular, sand versus clay is the one you're going to be thinking about. But I want you to understand the perspective. A sand particle is 30 to 1,000 times bigger than a clay particle. So you'll read about sand, silt, and clay, but you don't get this visual representation. Sandy soil tends to be in areas where water is flowing more frequently. So, like in Florida, that's where I would see sandy soil. Here in Colorado, in open spaces and grasslands, it's usually going to be clay soil. If you're near wetlands, in urban areas, they do tend to be sandier just because we build our urban areas where water flows. So I want you to keep in mind sand, silt, clay, how these interact, and we'll go deeper into it now. So this is what you'll see in Colorado. This is clay soil that wants to clump up. There's not a whole lot of water flow, and it's what clay soil is really good at is holding water. What it's really bad at is taking water in. So clay soil tends to be waterlogged. If there's water in it, it's hard to get that right balance. It's either too much or not enough, well, as I'm sure many of you know. And then here, back in Florida, this is sandy soil, and it's the opposite. If you were to dig 12 inches down probably on this farm, it would be beach sand. I mean, it's built on a beach in Florida, and water just wants to flow right through into the water table, and it's really hard to keep water in the soil. I mean, yeah, it won't puddle, it'll go right down, but then it'll just go right through. So this is a good visual representation of that happening. In a clay soil, water and nutrients will hit the surface and then run off into the nearest waterway. In sandy soil, this is leaching, and water and nutrients tend to run straight through and pollute our waterways. So how do we build these glue houses, and why does that help? Well, organic matter in sand, as we said, it's soil glue. It Organic matter and microbes and these glue houses all kind of come together, and they fill up the pore space of sand. So they add these sticky houses, this absorbent material, to a sandy soil, and they make it act more like clay. It's still really good at taking water in, but now it has that added ability to retain that water. And so that's what organic matter can do in sand. In clay, it's amazing. It does the opposite. So clay soil tends to is it's like a stack of paper. If I were to take one piece of paper off, you'd probably have a couple come up. They're sort of charged together. They want to stick together. So that's why it's so bad at taking water in. But these glue houses, this organic matter, this biology kind of breaks these clay particles up so they're not stacked completely flat on each other, and they add pore space. So a clay soil will act more like sand. It will still hold the water. Actually, it will kind of filter a little bit better, but then it will take more water in all at once. And I want you to think about what you're putting on your soil. These are leachable and runoffable chemicals that people put on their soil. These are water soluble, and they'll run right off into our waterways. And these are biological forms of nutrients. Bacteria is packed full of nitrogen. This is the nitrogen that plants and natural systems will consume. And they consume that nitrogen when a higher predator eats bacteria. That's what becomes the nitrogen that your plant can consume. So you need the bacteria, but then you also need the protozoa, the nematodes, the microarthropods, and the fungi. You need these characters all playing their parts to make these nutrients available to your plant. Okay, number 3, we're going to talk about cover cropping, or covering your soil at all times. Some call this soil armor. Um, I think if you're planning on covering your soil at all times, you might as well use a cover crop. I mean, that's the best. That's the primo soil coverage, because not only are you keeping the moisture in, that's really the purpose of covering your soil. You want to avoid evaporation. If you look at this picture, all the black part where you see the moisture evaporating off, that's exposed soil. Out in the distance, that's the grassland. So this is tillage and no soil armor causing evaporation, and then this is what ends up happening. You'll see big cracks in your soil, and actually this is dirt. This is not soil, and that I want to say the most important thing is to keep it covered. Keeping a live root keeps it alive, but also water keeps it alive. So if you see big cracks like this, you want to think, how do I fix this? I also want to mention if you see if you see like white crust on the top of this, uh, that's an indication that there's too much nutrient, that there's been over fertilizing. So as water evaporates, the nutrient stays on the surface and makes this crust. And the next time you're driving through farmland, just keep an eye out. You'll see this in the basins where people are over fertilizing. So I said cover crop is my favorite way of protecting the soil. This is a cover crop. Yeah, it's just one type. This is a triticale that we used on our farm, but diversity is best. But if you only have one type of seed, use that type of seed. Cover crops come in many varieties. There are legumes that really help fixing nitrogen, boosting that bacterial population. There are daikon radishes that are really good for surface compaction. So if you have a compaction layer right up at the top, a daikon radish will break through that. If you have a deeper compaction layer, think about sunflowers or sorghum Sudan grass. They have deep roots that are very hardy and strong and break through compaction. But you can really take your pick. You can mix and match. I mean, some of these are best in fall, some of these are best in spring. If you're choosing a cover crop for your raised bed, for your garden, for your farm, do some research, Google around because each cover crop has its strengths and its weaknesses and when it can grow. If you don't have a cover crop, that's okay. You can mulch. Wood chips, fall leaves, straw. If you don't have those things, you can use plastic. I would recommend a plastic that can be breathable. You don't want to suffocate your soil. I'm not a fan of those black silage tarps because they tend to burn and suffocate your soil. But if you have woven plastic, if you have landscape fabric, I think that works. Of course, my preference would be wood chips. I love wood chips because first it's a cover, first it's an armor, but then it ends up being a fungal food. The downside with wood chips is you don't want too many of in your garden because you want your plant to the root to have a surface contact with the soil, right? You don't want too many air pockets of like that size. You want micropores. So I would do maybe a thin layer, just kind of experiment, but don't go with a 6-inch layer, thinking that's gonna all get eaten. As a farmer, I once did make the mistake of saying, or I'm going to put so much wood chips and all this fungus is going to come and eat those wood chips. And it turns out our soil is bacterial and we need to build that fungal population as we grow. So yeah, if I put a big wood chip layer out in a forest, it decomposes a lot faster. But in a bacterial agricultural field, it's just not going to break down in the speed that we want. So maybe in 5 years, but one of the big challenges with regenerative ag and permaculture and all these practices is to keep your productivity going. Do not skip a year and boost all of this biology. So don't take a break. Like if I as I was farming, I was always pushing for, hey, let's take a break on this field. Let's take a year and let me just work on that field, so that my target date could be a year out. But if you really do it right, you can take up these practices as you're growing. Um, Fall leaves also a great mulch. The downside with fall leaves is they tend to blow away. If you have a way to churn them up, to chop them up with like a leaf shredder or something like that, I highly recommend fall leaves. That would be my favorite. Straw also a wonderful resource. I would be a little cautious of contamination. There are certain chemicals that they put in growing fields. I wouldn't be like super nitpicky about it, but if I saw an entire field not producing after I put straw down, I would think about the source of that straw. I don't want to like alarm anybody. Okay, principle number 4, we're going to talk about diverse roots. So this is different from soil cover. This is about breaking through compaction layers, adding air channels deep in the ground. And this is about adding, oh, I don't have it in the title here, but native plants. Native grasslands have very deep roots. They have much deeper roots than you may think. When you look at this diagram all the way on the left, That's our lawn. That's our, Kentucky bluegrass that we put on our lawn, and the roots are a quarter inch deep. Whereas we look at these perennial natural grasses and plants, and you see the diversity, and they can go 15 feet deep. So, think about bigger grasses, think about deep roots, think about a variety, because a variety of plant life and a variety of roots in your soil will dictate a variety of microbial life as well. So why do we even want deep roots? It's not like we're eating the roots of our tomatoes, right? Um, well, a deep root allows for stability of the plant. So the deeper the root goes, the less energy the plant has to put into just staying upright, and the more energy that plant can put into producing fruit or growing taller or whatever your objective for that plant is. So this slide I took off of like a soil testing presentation. I mean, I think a root depth is a great test for how healthy your soil is. And then I want to add, if you pull your roots out and there's like a sheath, if there's a coating of soil on your root, that's a good thing. I'm not talking about like a big clump. I'm talking about just on your root. That's called a rhizo sheath. That's the rhizo is the root, and it covers that surface, and that's where the nutrient cycle is happening. That's where the magic happens, and that's where you'll find your healthiest soil, and you'll see things happening very differently right at the contact point between the soil and the root. So that's a great thing if you see it. So this is what's happening. This is the contact point. And I'm not here to say chemistry isn't real. I mean, chemistry is a very important factor in this, and our plant does consume these nutrients that are in the form of chemicals, right? But the chemicals are dictated by biology, and the biology is attracted by the root. So what happens is the root puts out exudates, and it's like perfume for these microbes, and the microbes come and sniff in, and they come by, and a bacteria ends up near the root, and then a nematode comes by and eats that bacteria, and boom, that's plant available nutrient. So it's not that the nutrient is the wrong thing to look, it's just that we need to look one further step up the food chain and see what would be naturally producing that nutrient in our soil to grow this plant, this particular plant. And this is the name of the game. This is nutrient cycling. If we only had bacteria, we would not see this nutrient cycle happen as fast as we need. So you grow the bacteria and the fungi in your compost, and then the native higher level predators, these creatures take a couple weeks to grow and to populate. And if you were to turn them in a compost pile, they wouldn't necessarily like that. So these ones really thrive in soil, and these are the ones that make nutrients available to plants by consuming bacteria and fungi. Okay, nutrients. We're going to talk more about nutrients and what types of nutrients matter. Every soil on the world has a massive amount of nutrient value, but your plant cannot eat all of that nutrient, and it needs help from biology. So you have your total pool of nutrients, which is everything your soil has, but the only thing that your plant can eat is really this soluble part. And to get down from total to exchangeable, exchangeable is really when biology starts taking over, and the soluble part, this is where your nutrient would dissolve in water and becomes available to plants. Your soluble part is the part that your plant can eat. So I want you to be conscious of this when when you get a soil test from a lab, because often soil tests will use different chemicals to extract the nutrient off of the rock material. And sometimes they'll get a lot of this total pool that has no relevance to your plant. And a lot of people measure soil health by how much soluble nutrient is in your soil. But think about the fertilizer we were talking about. That's all soluble nutrient. So we don't want to measure our soil in a way that dumping a lot of nutrient would just rig the test and show that we have super healthy soil, would we? So how do we measure this stuff? And further, I mean, back to these different types of ecosystems. An old growth forest does not have a lot of soluble nutrient. And I would argue that an old growth forest is the most productive soil on the planet. I mean, it's growing these giant trees. So why would an old growth forest not have plant available nutrients, a lot of plant available nutrients at any given time? Well, it's because the bacteria and the fungi and the soil ecosystem in a forest has spent decades, I mean, centuries building itself to grow these plants. So the relationship between the root and these microbes is so fine tuned that there's no excess, there's no waste, there's no soluble, I mean, there's very little soluble nutrient. On the other side, when we're talking about agriculture, there's a recommended soluble nutrient for each state throughout the country. And I would point to that and I would say, well, why would I have double the recommendation of nutrient just over state lines? You know, this is not a set in stone thing. Each piece of soil is going to be a little different and it's going to depend on what you want to grow. So maybe you would want a little more soluble nutrient, but I would argue that we're overdoing it right now. So again, we're talking about inorganic fertilizers. These are lime, gypsum, Epsom salt, ammonium citrate, nitrate, and ammonium sulfate. These are the ones I'm not a big fan of. I mean, these are organic amendments. This is compost, compost teas and compost extracts, wood chips, straw. Manure, I would be a little careful of manure. I would want to compost my manure before putting it into my soil. And you think about the reasoning behind that. This is not a cow pasture. This is a growing field. So it's not built to decompose all of that material fast enough. When you compost it, you're making it more balanced like soil. You're introducing a lot more bacteria that's taking a lot of that nutrient out and that's repurposing it into their bodies basically. And that nutrient's still there, but it's just going to get to your plant over a longer period of time through compost. Whereas manure, you tend to have more soluble, and you'll have the same pitfall as you would with inorganic fertilizers. Okay, number five, we're going to talk about animal integration. Um, this is a part of the ecosystem, right? In nature, we would have hooved animals walking around our grasslands where our vegetables would naturally want to grow. Um, so what we know animals do is one, they're really good at weed mitigation. They eat a lot of weeds really fast, especially these two wonderful goats. Um, they're also really good at amending the soil through their manure. You know, I would not be worried about a goat grazing a year before. You know, if I had a plot of land and I say grow in that land 2 years from now, I'd put a couple goats on there and let them fly. You know, let them do their thing. Their hooves are little aerators. So what their hooves do is they add air channels for our topsoil, and they actually help aerate and create those aerobic conditions. So if you have the opportunity, of course you want animal integration. So again, this is think about the bison and the dust bowl. I mean, this is what happens when we cut an ecosystem that's has millions and millions of livestock and we just take them out overnight. If you don't have animals on your site, at my farm we did not have animals. It was a rare example where we did not have that opportunity. We did a lot of broad forking. Broad forking, if you're not familiar, it's like a fork, and you just stick it down in the ground, and you're not churning the whole thing up like you would a rototiller. It's not putting your soil in a blender. It's just adding air columns. So if there's a compaction layer, you're adding air down below that, and you're sort of emulating like a kind of like a hoof, right? Um, this is extremely hard work. So, do what you can, but there are also machinery options. And this is the idea of that one last till. If you're transitioning into a regenerative system, you could use a keyline plow or a yeoman's plow. And what this is, it's basically like putting a knife in your soil and dragging it across. So you're leaving big portions of the soil undisturbed, but then you're also introducing oxygen deep into the soil, and you're helping aerate the parts that have been choked out. So, if you're seeing a compaction layer, which we're going to talk about in a minute, you need to find a way to aerate that, whether it's through a root or whether it's through a hand tool, or maybe you have to use a machine. I'm not, nothing I'm saying today is going to be set in stone. These are the principles, and building soil is like putting together a puzzle. It's really interesting when you get into it. Um, Again, if we do not have animals or livestock on our grazing on our land, we can use biology and organic matter to take place of their manure. Uh, Compost will supercharge your soil even better than manure. I mean, this is what we're taking, and we're growing that culture of bacteria and fungi, and we're putting right in. So compost can take the place of manure, and it's a perfectly great natural system. Um, Again, think about the types of compost. And I want to add, depending on your scale and your purpose, applying compost can be really difficult. It is a super heavy product. So buying it is really tough. You have to truck it in a lot of times from out of town. Spreading it is really hard. Getting an even layer. Do you use a rake? Do you have machinery? Not a lot of people have compost spreading machinery. There's a great option of compost liquid, compost tea, or extract, and that can take those microbes off the compost and apply them directly onto the land. So you're kind of like cutting out that all that heavy stuff, and you're making it a lot more manageable. So look into making teas and making extracts. I think those are great solutions if you do not have the capability to spread compost. So most farmers, you're going to see compaction. Even, if you overdo it with grazing, their hooves will cause compaction at the surface. Um, Most of the things that we're talking about with regenerative ag are ways to reduce compaction. Compaction is like your number one enemy, so we're going to be talking about that for a little bit tonight. Um, Tilling or construction are huge sources of compaction. What you're doing is you're disrupting those glue houses. You're taking the pore space out, and then when it settles, it's all clumped together. You might see a compaction layer that's 6 inches deep. You might see a compaction layer that's 18 inches deep. Uh, you have to identify how deep your compaction layer is to kind of narrow down what the cause of it is. What's happening below the compaction layer is anaerobic. Oxygen cannot flow through these compaction layers. So below your compaction layer, that's where you need to make sure you're introducing oxygen. So causes of compaction. As I said, heavy equipment or construction, I should say, uh, that's going to cause compaction kind of throughout. So if you're growing at home, I would bet that you're dealing with compaction and probably at the surface. If you are working on a farm and you're driving heavy equipment over your soil constantly, weirdly, that compaction layer tends to be 18 inches down. I'm not sure why. If you leave your soil bare and rain starts beating at the surface, that is a real cause of compaction. And it's not just at it's not right at the surface, it's deeper down. I believe this is where your soil is getting like waterlogged and there's not enough like oxygen happening, but I'm not totally sure why that happens. But if you see compaction layer that's 12 inches down and you have bare soil, you might, it's probably because it doesn't have that armor to protect it. Foot traffic often is surface compaction. And I recently saw that on like ball fields. It's like 2 inches deep. And you will see that if it's like a soccer field or a place where there's a lot of foot traffic. Um, on a farm, I kind of have the mentality of there's not going to be that much foot traffic. Like, of course, we need to make aisles, but like we need to make sure our soil is resilient enough to handle like a footstep here or there, right? It needs to be able to bounce back. So in an agricultural context, it's like, yeah, make sure people don't trample, but I'm not like as nitpicky on like stepping here on near a plant. So how do you assess the situation, of compaction? It depends on how deep your compaction layer is. You want to see how thick it is. You can see a surface compaction because you'll see like bent carrots or you'll see beets popping out of the ground or radishes popping up. Uh, Pay attention to the weeds that are growing or the indicators. Bindweed, dandelion, thistle. These are all indicators of compaction. They love compaction. Um, and if you don't have plant roots to show you, get a penetrometer or track that down. I mean, it's getting a little serious about soil science, but this is a very important tool. And what this measures is how much force does it require me to break through that compaction layer. Why this is relevant is over 300 psi is impenetrable by roots. So if you're growing in a field or for a production, pay attention to this number of 300 psi because that's when you need to start thinking of that one last till. If you're, that one last yeoman's plow or broad fork, when I'm saying tilling, I don't mean rototilling, but something to break through that layer. There's also a factor of maybe it's compacted over here and maybe there's an old root over here and there's some oxygen. So it's not like set in stone, but that 300 number is important when you're thinking about cover cropping. So breaking through compaction is extremely tricky. You can have a layer of compaction that's 6 inches deep and you'll still have a runoff, right? It'll go through your topsoil and then run the whole thing off. So that's how you'll lose topsoil. Um, Chemical treatments like lime or gypsum, they will have like a temporary alleviating effect. They'll fluff up your soil, but the problem in particular with lime is it's a fungicide. So any short-term benefit you will see will be far outdone by killing the fungal population because think about those mycelium, that web is adding pore space and place for oxygen to flow. So that can break compaction eventually. And this is the kind of mindset we're talking about. If maybe I'm not growing for 3 years, maybe fungi could break through that compaction. But usually we're talking about um, you know production crops, things that we want to enjoy in this season, and that's where you think about how do we break through. How do we break through that layer? I'm going to quickly talk about how this looks in a farm scenario. We had NRCS is the Natural Resource Conservation Service. It's a federal agency, and what they do is they come to farms and they give recommendations, and they actually have like incentives for healthy soil practices, where you can get some financing. And what they showed us is you have a compaction layer that's about 8 inches deep. And we thought, well, it's probably because we've been rototilling and our tiller goes about 8 inches deep and it's probably creating what's called a hard pan and compacting at that depth. So we thought, well, how do we solve this? And what we did was we switched to a harrow. Um, just for context, a tiller, a rototiller goes vertically. It's kind of like a blender on its side, and it cuts deep and down. And a harrow is only goes a couple inches deep, and it goes horizontally. It's kind of akin to a rake. Um, so we thought, we're going to harrow instead of till. We're going to just do it at the surface. And what we experienced was a compaction layer really close to the surface. We started seeing beets popping out of the ground in sandy soil, which was very surprising. So, I want you to think about solutions, but I want you to keep your head on your shoulders and kind of be able to identify what's happening. Because, if we hadn't learned about the 8 inch layer, we wouldn't know about that 2 inch layer that we just made. So in the end, it ended up being a benefit because we knew how to manage it. But it was an unforeseen consequence of tilling at the same depth consistently. So my recommendation with all of this is start cover cropping. That's probably the most important. Keep your soil covered with a lot, keep a live root in the ground. Think about reducing tillage. It's that relationship between tilling and cover cropping is the one I want you to keep an eye on. Um, I think we're going to take a break for questions, and then we're going to talk about some other stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, this is so great so far. I'm like taking a lot of notes. Cool. Yeah, so we've got a few questions here. So one right at the start. So it sounds like this person attended your last webinar. You mentioned last time that you can't adequately add moisture to a compost pile by watering from above. So wondered about ways to do that. Could that be watered by, they say, injection by using a root watering device, or do you have any other ideas on that?
Well, I think like in a soil context, like that's where those roots really help because like that's pore space. Um, that keeping it covered keeps the moisture like kind of evenly like distributed. So like once you lose that cover, you see evaporation at the surface and it kind of filters up, and then you're kind of in trouble. So like I agree, it is very hard to keep it watered. I'm not saying soak everything. I'm just saying keep an adequate moisture to grow your cover crop, basically.
Awesome. Great. And then this person is saying that their garden does have a lot of weeds in it right now. And so do you recommend pulling or putting those pile of weeds in a compost pile, or what's the best way to get rid of those?
That can be tricky if you're doing an at-home compost. Like if I were doing it, I'd be perfectly comfortable with like thistle, bindweed, whatever. But like I'm a professional composter, so if you put like extra care into it, yeah. If you have a way of diverting that to a large scale composter, I would be conscious of bindweed and thistle in particular because those ones can reproduce through the root.
Gotcha. Great. Those are the two that I have. So that's good to
Awesome.
know. Home run. Cool. So we had a few questions wondering about cover crop suggestions for their home gardens.
Uh, I like clover a lot. I like red clover, or no, white clover, excuse me. Red clover is the one that grows tall, and I think white clover is the one that stays low. I really like white clover, peas. But yeah, if I'd pick one, I'd say white clover.
Awesome. Great. Yeah, I think this last question, and then we can get to the rest of it. And then if we have time at the end, maybe we can address the rest of these. But should you turn your compost in the winter? A quick question on that, because you mentioned turning your compost.
Yeah, if you have the ability, and if it hasn't frozen, keep turning it until it freezes. Your backyard pile will likely get too cold, but if you stay on it, you could keep it warm through the winter feasibly. So you keep turning as long as you can.
Cool. Awesome. Great. Yeah, I think we can go ahead and get to the rest of the presentation, and yeah, I'll try and address some of these, and we can answer at the end as well if we've got time.
Right. Yeah, keep turning as long as it stays warm. Once it gets like below 100, then you can, or 110 or so, like you can start thinking about turning it less. So that don't always turn if it's not heating up back up. Um, Okay, so this is gonna we're gonna go through this pretty quickly, but how do we measure our success? These are like different schools of thought in soil science, and there's the chemical industry, and then there's the biological. These two tend to be at odds. I think it's kind of silly because what we're talking about is biochemistry. I mean, it's both of these things working together. And then in the middle, you have your physical tests. And I really like these because they're good at testing for these microbial byproducts. So we'll talk about each one of these. I want to say any soil test, even my favorites, any soil test is going to have its pitfalls. You're really like looking through a peephole, like you're building up a picture of the landscape. With chemical tests, I think the most important thing is understand that you can get wildly different units of measurement on a like an NPK test on your lab tests. Uh, I Googled these to look them up, and then I don't know them off the top of my head. So like just keep an eye out for these categories and figure out what exact units of measurement, and then do the conversion. I was in a situation when I first started working on soil. I had like 15 years of soil tests, and it took me forever to figure out why there was 1,000-fold increase of boron or whatever over 1 year, and we saw no difference in crop yield. So it's just as simple as a unit of measurement. And then again, the extraction agent. There are a couple that get different nutrient values. I don't have too much time to get into that, but think about the extraction agent and look up what nutrient that gets. It's like an albricht is an example. The melic is another example. And pH. I mean, this is something a lot of people talk about, and this is something that I'm not that interested in. I mean, at different pHs, you have different available nutrients, and a lot of plants here need boron, but then they also need potassium. So how do you fit that, right? Well, you can fit it through biology. Interestingly, the more we learn about this rhizosheath that I mentioned, this is like the roots that have clay packed on dirt or soil, excuse me. This is the biologically active part of soil, and this can change the pH up to the micrometer. So look at this right here in the blue. It's alkaline. It's 7.5, but then the plant is getting an acidic soil. So once I saw this, I kind of rethought pH as a concept. Your general trends of pH is if it's more acidic, it will tend to be a fungal dominant soil. If it's more alkaline, it will tend to be a bacterial dominant soil. So this also lines up with what we see in agricultural fields is alkaline soils, bacterial dominant. The buffer pH, this is a pH test that is tailored to give you a chemical application recommendation. So when you see this, they're going to it's going to come with a recommendation of lime. Again, I would steer away from lime because it will give you a temporary relief, but the longer term, that's a different conversation because it has a detrimental effect on fungi. Mineralizable nitrogen, man, we're getting really nerdy here. This is the nitrogen that is converted from an organic form to a mineral form. Uh, that's great. That's what we've been talking about. That's making the nutrient become available after that bacteria or that lower level being is hunted, right? Uh, the downside of this is that the it's quite often misrepresented. You'll often see a lot of minerals that are not plant available counted in this test, and really the nitrogen that I care about is in a legume or in the body of a microbe. There's a lot of nitrogen out there that is not available to your plant, and it tends to be counted in lab tests. Cation exchange capacity. This is one that I think is important. This is how adsorbent your soil is. So it's not how well it takes things in, it's how well it can let things stick to its surface. So it's like biology and nutrients, and it kind of like has that like glomming effect. And this tracks with what we talked about with sand and silt and loam and clay. So what I want you to look out for on this one is if you get a lab test back for a sandy soil, expect that number to be 10 times lower on cation exchange than a clay soil. These are the natural tendencies of these soils. So you can get it's a you can see people, you can kind of doctor the numbers by saying, oh look, your cation exchange capacity is over here, but if it's a sandy soil, then maybe it just naturally doesn't have that. Um, the solution to all of this is organic matter in compost. The cation exchange capacity of compost or organic matter is 2 to 400. So look, I mean, clay is 30. This is 2 to 400. So this is how you really boost that cation exchange capacity. And this is what allows your surface to hold and release your nutrients. So base saturation, this is the same kind of measurement of cation exchange capacity, but the way that it's extracted through this Albrecht extraction method, it only identifies calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium. So there's value to this reading, but it's not a value of all nutrients. It's just valuing these four. What you can get out of this is your calcium magnesium ratio. you want that to be around 7 to 1, 7 calcium to 1 magnesium. And this is the one rare case where you might put something that's inorganic, calcium, to amend your soil to get that to your right to that right ratio. If it's 1 to 1, that's when you'll see a compacted soil. If it's 10 to 1, then it's like dusty or repels water. I would just make sure you're absolutely sure that that's the solution before you start adding calcium. Electrical conductivity. This is measuring the current from positive cations to negative anions. These are salts, so it's meant to be a measure of salt. But the downfall of this is if you had 1,000 anions and 1,000 cations, they're bonded together and there's no electrical charge between them. So you're not counting either of those thousands. So it doesn't really say a lot about salt. It more says about imbalance in cations and anions. Organic matter, you will get a reading from a lab test, and I think this is super important. If your organic matter is less than 3%, this is when you want to spend a lot of time on your compost because you don't really have the biology to bounce back as fast as you would need. If it's above 3%, this is when you're starting to think more about soil treatment and you're sort of transitioning. I don't want to say out of compost. You still want to pay attention to high quality compost, but as your organic matter rises, you can get your soil, away from even needing compost feasibly if your organic matter is high enough and your soil is active enough. One thing, a lot of people say there's a limit to how much organic matter you should strive for. I personally do not believe in this. If it's stable and if it's active, I believe you can grow in 100% organic matter if that suited you. I mean, so I don't necessarily subscribe to that too much organic matter part if your soil is has the microbes to cycle nutrients. Okay, we're going to get to physical tests. I really like these because they're cheap, they're replicable. The limitations is it's really hard to get a deep soil test. It's time intensive, and you're disturbing the soil. But I wouldn't worry about that too much. Again, this is your sand, silt, clay. This is a non-biology part that I want you to take notice of. You can measure this from a mason jar. And I encourage you to look this up on YouTube. Basically, what you do is you put water in your soil in a mason jar, you shake it up. After a minute, there's a sediment layer on the bottom. You draw a line there. Then you wait another 2 hours. There will be another one on top of that. You draw a line there. And then after 2 days, after 48 hours, there'll be a third line and you draw a third line. And then you measure that, how much space that is taking, and you can get a percentage of your sand, silt, and clay. So this will kind of dictate whether you're looking to absorb more water or whether you're looking for water to flow through more easily, that sand and clay relationship. Even if you don't have a mason jar, you can use your hand. If it's gritty, it's going to be sand. I mean, at this point, I can kind of like feel soil. If it forms a ribbon and sticks together, it's going to be clay. So if you take this slide and sort of follow this matrix, you'll get a pretty interesting result, and it's relatively accurate, and it builds that connection with soil. That's why I like it. These are really quick ones. We're going to go through. When you're looking at composition, I want you to be more interested in making spongy soil than tilthy soil. Tilth is that farmer's dream of like we want the powdered sugar kind of thing that we can easily plant into. And I can attest to that. It's much easier it is easy to plant into tilthy soil, but it doesn't have that structure we're looking for. So you really want to strive to have spongy soil that keeps its moisture and has like a clump, but not like an aerobic clump. So it's called an aggregate. It's not necessarily packed together. It just sticks together. Pay attention to root depth. This is a great observational thing. These are called J roots. So you can tell here there's a compaction layer, 4 to 6 inches deep, because you have your big roots that are literally hitting a wall and just taking a detour. So this is a really good way of identifying that compaction layer. Bulk density. This is something you will get back from a lab test in a lot of cases, and I think this is super important. This is measuring the pore space. in your soil, so how solid your soil is or how fluffy your soil is, you want a low bulk density. You want your soil to have pore space for oxygen and water to flow and roots to grow. You want your soil to be penetrable. Infiltration rate. This is I did an internship project with students 3 years in a row, and this is a really easy test where you take a pipe. We had like an 8-inch pipe, and we hammered it down until there was about 3 inches above the surface, and then we poured water into that pipe, and we measured how long it took the soil to take that water in to absorb or whatever. So this is a measure that can change depending on sand, silt, and clay, right? So sandy soil, we're looking to slow that infiltration down. Clay soil, we're looking to speed that infiltration up. Water holding capacity, this is how much water your soil can hold at once. So pretty simple. We just soaked soil, weighed it, and then completely dried it and weighed it. So we measured how much, what percentage of the soil's weight would be water at its full capacity. When we look at the farm, this is like I love this one because these are agricultural fields, and we see 20 to 30% of the weight was water. But then here, this is a natural area, the 50%, and that's a natural wetland. So that is naturally sandy soil that has glomulated with those glue houses and is retaining even more water than the clay soil in our agricultural fields. Aggregate stability. If I had a live audience, I would do this. This is a great showstopper. Basically, you just submerge your soil in a cylinder, and you watch unhealthy soil disintegrate, and you watch healthy soil keep its form. This means the repercussions of this is one, we're losing our topsoil to runoff, but two, our healthy soil is filtering water as it flows down into our water table. So what we did with our internship program is we took this test and we sort of made it measurable. So we put our soil in a sieve, we dipped it in and out of water for a predetermined amount of time. It doesn't matter, you just do it the same way each time because you're tracking a difference, you're tracking change. And you would measure how much of the soil would withstand a flood. So that this is probably my favorite of all the tests because it's really measuring the soil's resilience to natural disasters, to floods, to fires, and all these other things. And then these are the results from our aggregate stability test. Basically, what we learned from this test is it's a measurement of how recently the field was tilled. So you see the zeros. These are our conventionally managed fields. And then you see a 5 here where we took a year off from a conventionally managed field. So we could see an increase, 1 year of letting your soil rebuild has a 5% increase. But then I want you to look here at the natural areas. Nearly 75% of that soil could withstand a flood. And that makes a whole lot of sense in a wetland. But it's also remarkable that it's happening with clay or with sand, excuse me. Look test. You can understand a lot just by the look and the feel of your soil. The look, I'd be hesitant with jet black soil. It could be a byproduct of anaerobic bacteria, especially like green or yellow soil. Sandy soil could be black in a forest because fungi also tend to exude like a black substance. But if it's jet black, it's probably not great for the vegetables. You're looking for something that's more dark brown. You can see compaction layers from dull brown or brown gray. If you see red, blue, green, this means that your soil has been compacted for years and then it's been exposed to oxygen, but there's a lot of metal in it. So take that for what it's worth. I probably wouldn't want to grow in that soil. It's one, because it's been compacted for so long, but then two, you can see the metals in there. And I do want to mention that bacterial dominant soil tends to be like a gray color, which you'll likely see on agricultural fields. So what you're looking for is the color of a 70% cocoa bar. You're looking for a really rich brown, not necessarily black. This is true for soil and for compost. Black gold, unfortunately, is a misnomer. You're looking for that 70% cocoa chocolate gold, but it just doesn't sound the same. Look test. I would say the color of this looks great, but it's not really holding its form. So just keep an eye. Keep your head on your shoulders. This could be able to form really great, but it looks a little dry. So every single soil has its pros and cons. Look at this one. This is holding its structure. It's likely fungal because it's black. I mean, this is the kind of soil that I see in my mom's yard in Florida, where she has like this wonderful forest and sandy soil. It's jet black, and it grows trees, and it clumps together like this. Maybe not the best for vegetables, but we'll see. Um, Structure. I want you to pay attention to the pore space in this. Like the one on the left, yeah, it's holding its form, but it looks to me like it's been pressed together. This one has been looped together. So you can kind of see the pore space, you can see the roots, you can see the little chunks. This one, there's not a whole lot of space for oxygen or water to flow. And then you could tell what's been happening to these aggregates. This one on the top left, it formed those aggregates, but then there was some kind of surface compaction. You can see them flattening out. The one on the right, I love that one. Look, there's a worm in it. So you can see the pore space, you can see roots. Um, this red one on the bottom left, that compaction and metal problem that we talked about, that would be my guess. All of these things are best guesses, and you're not going to be able to diagnose soil by sight. Um, a couple minutes to talk about biology. When you're talking about biology, consider the time of year. You're going to have different biology in the spring than you are in the fall. So you don't want to test spring and fall and say, "Wow, I saw a decrease," because there's just naturally less biology in the fall. All tests have these limitations. Organic matter, microbial biomass. This is a test that you can order, and it's really good at giving like the total biomass of life, but you don't get to show is it bacteria, is it fungi? It's just a quantitative measurement. Worm count. Fill up a bucket, count the worms. Do it again next year. I love this test because worms are indicators of a lot of really great biology. CO2 absorption. This one is measuring how much carbon dioxide is coming out of your soil. So it's really great for measuring bacteria, which breathes out carbon dioxide, but it's not great at measuring fungi. So this is kind of like half of the story. Phospholipid fatty acid, PLFA. This one also undercounts fungi. It counts the fatty acids in the cell walls of microbes. Um, and microbes, bacteria tend to have more PLFA than fungi do. So this one, it does give a good count of both, but it tends to overestimate or underestimate fungi and overestimate bacteria. It's pretty hard to get a reading on your fungal biomass. This is my personal favorite. Look at it directly under a microscope. This is where you'll see those fungal strands. There are people who do this, and you can send your soil in, and they'll have a meeting with you. But this is a really cool skill to have because you can kind of see what's going on. You can take factors of, is this aerobic? Is this anaerobic? Is it bacterial? Is it fungal? The thing is, it's subjective. I mean, there's a lot going on in our soil, and there's a lot of different types of microbes, and we can't identify them down to the species. We can just say that's likely aerobic, that's likely anaerobic, and make a judgment call. So every soil test is going to give you a little piece of the picture. That's what I have tonight. If you have more questions, I know we got technical at the end and I blew through that, but the interesting part was how to treat your soil. So thank you so much. Feel free to contact me.
Awesome. Great. Yeah. Thank you so much, Rutger. That was awesome. Yeah, lots to learn. And like we were talking about at the beginning, learning about soil is interesting because we're still learning so much. Everyone is. And so it's not like we have all the answers. So we're all going to learn this together. And I like the idea of, yeah, breaking out the microscope, and relearning those skills that we did in maybe high school, but maybe earlier than that too. So awesome. Great. Yeah. And so Rutger provided his email. You can also email us at gardeninfo@resourcecentral.org. We want to be respectful of everybody's time. So I think we will go ahead and end it here. But this was such a great webinar. And yeah, we'll send along the slides and the recording of tonight's webinar. So keep an eye out for that as well if you want to look back on that. Again, address your questions if you've got them to us in the future. We'll be here for you. So thank you all for attending. We hope to see you at a future Waterwise Yard seminar with us. Someone just said, thank you so much. Love this. So many more questions. And I think that's how it goes when you're learning something new.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Feel free to email. Yeah.
awesome. Yeah. Thanks so much for offering that. And yeah, we hope to have Rutger back again for our seminar series next year. So hopefully you all can attend as well. But thanks everyone and have a great rest of your night.